Morning, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple minutes here to let everyone get settled in, and then we'll get started. If you're just joining, we're just giving everyone another 30 seconds to trickle in. We've got a big group today. Might take everyone a minute to hop in. All right, we're going to get started here, but as people trickle in, the real content doesn't start for another 3 minutes, so you've still got time. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Business Support Series webinar. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Emma Minchevsky. I'm Communications Manager here at the Halifax Chamber, and I'm your host for this morning. I consider myself quite the local shopper, and my coworkers actually joked last year that I really did my part in getting the economy back to life over the last couple of months and even starting last year. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Narrative Research today to find out if it's true and if I actually really did do my part. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions for our presenters this morning. When we get to the Q&A and throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them into the chat box or into the Q&A box, and we will answer them near the end when we get to the Q&A session. Our presenters today are Margaret Brigley, CEO of Narrative Research, and Margaret Chapman, COO of Narrative Research and past chair of the Halifax Chamber Board. Welcome, Margaret and Margaret. Thank you both for joining us. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emma, and good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And Narrative Research may not be a company that all of you are familiar with. Although we've been around for more than 40 years, it's a name that's relatively new. Just 2 years ago, myself and two partners, Margaret Chapman and Peter McIntosh, purchased the company. And then in April of 2019, we rebranded to make it our own and also to really better reflect what we do, namely collect insights that tell a story or provide an important narrative for our clients. And we're headquartered here in Halifax. We are very pleased to be a women business enterprise, a WEBE. And we've got offices throughout Atlantic Canada, or staff throughout Atlantic Canada, and also in Bermuda. We regularly conduct research locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. And today, Margaret Chapman and I would like to offer you insight and perspective on our province and the region, specifically relating to supporting local. So the information that we'll be sharing with you today comes from a few of our key research tools. First off, our Atlantic Quarterly is well established as the authority on public opinion in Atlantic Canada. And every quarter, we collect at least 1,500 random telephone surveys across the region. It really provides an important lens of public opinion here in Atlantic Canada. And then we'll be sharing some information from our East Coast Voice. That's the largest online general population panel of more than 10,000 Atlantic Canadians. The results we're going to share with you today are from recent studies conducted in February for both of these important research tools. So with that in mind, I'm going to begin by providing some important context to our discussion today from our Atlantic Quarterly. More than 2 decades ago, we created something called the Consumer Confidence Index in Atlantic Canada, and we've been tracking consumer confidence now every quarter for more than 25 years. When I say index, for those of you who may not be as engulfed in research as we are, an index is a composite score of 5 questions, and it's perceptions of the current state of the provincial economy, the anticipated state of the provincial economy in the near future, our current household well-being, future household well-being, and also conditions for making a major purchase, like a major appliance or a vehicle. So consumer confidence is one area where we've seen dramatic change. The index was initially set at 100 when we developed it, and our most recent Atlantic Quarterly, collected in February, shows a dramatic decline in consumer confidence since the pandemic hit. Confidence levels for the region hit a record low in May. Not surprising given a global pandemic. Currently, here in Atlantic Canada, consumer confidence sits at 85.2, Halifax. In Nova Scotia, rather, it's 87.3, and Halifax is 88.5, so a little bit higher. And that's typically the trend. We see that urban centers, the level of consumer confidence is higher than that outside of urban centers. Again, another important context here before we leave this slide is following the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, you can see that consumer confidence rebounded quite quickly. But in the years that followed that, there was long-term stagnation in our economy with low wage growth, discretionary spending being compromised, and job stagnation and consumer spending being relatively weak. So this is really going to be an important marker for us to watch in the coming months. It's certainly reassuring this last few quarters to see that things are slowly starting to rebound, but you can see there's a long way to go before it's back to pre-pandemic levels. Now, another piece of context is what's happened to household wealth during the pandemic. So despite that sharp decline in consumer confidence, we actually saw household wealth growing during the past year. In fact, according to StatsCan, you can see here that Canadian household wealth increased by 5.2% in the first 3 quarters of 2020. And another really important point here is that disposable income for the lowest income households increased by 37%, more than for any other households. So these are really important considerations as we think about that local spend. So much has happened in the past year. And during that time, one thing we've been doing is regularly assessing public opinion on a wide range of topics. One of those topics that's been especially of interest to Margaret and I has been this whole concept of supporting local. So we asked Atlantic Canadians what they thought on that topic. And Margaret's going to share a little bit of information right now on what we've seen in that regard.
So Emma's not alone, that the idea of supporting local is really supported as a concept. So in February, we asked over 2,000 Atlantic Canadians about whether they supported or opposed the idea of supporting local. And not surprisingly, 91% of those 2,000 residents told us that they supported the idea. And the support was really strong. So a third of people gave us a 10 out of 10 for saying that they supported it. And over half gave scores of 9 or 10. So it's those superlative scores that shows us that people really love the idea. But we wanted to really dig into the topic and understand whether this was lip service or if people really meant it. And we also wanted to understand what supporting local actually meant. How do people define local? And when they're making purchases, what do they consider to be supporting local? Is it really just an independent business, or is it a broader topic? So that's what we're going to be exploring here. And we wanted to give you some of that foundational context about consumer spending, consumer confidence, and household wealth, just as a backdrop for what might be in people's pockets and how they might be making these kinds of decisions. So supporting local, hugely supported concept, probably not a surprise to people. We also asked, at the start of the year, we went back to people and said, you know, kind of look back at 2020, really an unprecedented year. And we wanted to understand, amidst all the negative things that were happening, what kind of silver linings did you see? And I pulled this slide in just because I think it's interesting to see where supporting local fits in with other perceived silver linings of the pandemic. So half of people told us that an increased focus on supporting local was actually one of the key benefits of 2020. So there was this, you know, hyper local feeling because of the lack of ability to travel, sometimes even outside of our own communities, and people really did see that as a benefit. And you can see there's a lot of other silver linings of the pandemic as well, including kind of some of the online benefits. People started to see that some online functions were really helpful to them, like meeting with their doctor for certain things online instead of in person, or maybe they connected more with family members and with their community and so forth. So just to show you how supporting local really stood out ahead of all of those other types of things as one of the things people looked back on as positive. And, you know, again, for context, we wanted to kind of dig into why we like the idea of local. Why is it a positive idea that so many people support? Well, just as some background, economically, it does make sense. More money does stay in the communities where we live and work. And we know, looking at evidence across North America, that local businesses are more likely to then utilize other local businesses and service providers. So it's good for the business community locally. Independent businesses can return as much as 3 times as much money per dollar of sales to the community in which they operate compared to large chains. And that's anywhere between 2 times and 3 times, depending on the type of retail or restaurant business. So there's a huge knock-on effect from supporting local businesses. It can also be a benefit for the environment because in many cases, supporting local businesses can have a smaller carbon footprint than supporting an organization that might have global or national footprint. And then there's also the CSR component. So local businesses are owned and operated by your neighbors, and therefore we can infer that they would care about the community in which they operate. They're invested in the well-being of that community and its future, and they might be involved in local causes and charitable organizations, as I'm sure many of you on the call are. So those are some of the kind of background reasons why I think so many people might like the idea of supporting local. So then we wanted to ask people why they supported local. So, what they would consider to be supporting local. So let's look at how people interpret the term. And we asked them for whether they agreed or disagreed with various statements that could be interpreted as buying local. So the first one there, widespread agreement that buying products or services from an independent business located in your province is local. That counts as local for sure. Same 79% of Atlantic Canadians in this large study told us that buying products or services that are produced in your province count as local. But far, far fewer say if you're buying products or services from a business located in your province, but it might not be independently owned, that doesn't really count as local. So just keep some of these things in mind, and we'll bring them up in a moment when we look at purchase considerations. So if it's a chain or a larger organization that's not based in your province, very few people consider that to be local. And again, buying products or services sold in your province, but they might be produced elsewhere, only 20% of our respondents consider that to be local. And then buying products or services from businesses that are located anywhere in Canada. So it's a Canadian business, that's not considered local. Only 2 in 10 say that's considered local. And then we asked a more fine-grained question about what counts as supporting local in terms of jurisdiction. And again, you can see kind of how small the net is. So it's really your province or your community when people would agree that supporting local counts. If it's a product or service from anywhere in the Atlantic region, only 1/3 of people agree that that's supporting local. And 16% say if it's from somewhere in Canada, but outside of your province, that counts as local. So you can see there's really quite a small net that people consider to be local. And again, going back to the previous slide, it's independent businesses that are, or products and services that are produced in your province that people consider to be local. So just underlining that, independent business and those goods and services that are produced in your province or your community are what people interpret the term supporting local to mean. But that might not necessarily be what people consider when they're actually making purchases.
So we support local, we endorse the concept of it, but are we really putting our money where our mouths are? And before we look at what's happening now, let's look at the before the pandemic. What we saw prior to the pandemic is that 3/4 of Atlantic Canadians and 80% of Nova Scotians said they made the majority of purchases by visiting stores rather than buying online. People want that direct engagement with the end product. Touching and seeing a product was hugely important, 67%. So 2/3 are saying they prefer to see and touch a product before they buy it. But we know that price is important. It still is. 77% said they're looking for the best deal. So consumers are very price conscious. And that's an important consideration that we cannot ignore when considering supporting local. And then finally, only a minority said they were unable to find the products they want at local stores, 38%. So the bulk can. They know that it does exist here at local stores.
So based on all this information, local should be a top consideration when making a purchase, right? It sounds like people love the idea. It sounds like people are really focused on products and services from their own province, from their own community. It's a silver lining of the pandemic. It's really something that people are endorsing. But when we asked people about their actual considerations when they're looking to make a purchase, it's less clear. So here we said, what's important when you're actually making a purchase? And you might be surprised to see that the top factor on this list is whether the business employs people locally. Second is if it's available locally versus ordering online from outside of the region. So that's really important to people as well. Being Canadian owned is important, as important as availability locally. And just remember, a moment ago, we were talking about, is a Canadian business, does that count as local? No, it doesn't. People are also concerned about where the product is made. So that really endorses the concept of local we looked at before. And independent ownership, which is the top consideration for what counts as a local business. Only half of people think about that when they're actually making a purchase. Whether or not the business is headquartered in the region, 4 in 10 say that's something they think about. And if it's a small business, only 31% of people say that that's something that is important to them as a consideration when they're buying. So just take those two things. We looked earlier at what counts as local, and really it had to be an independent business in your province, or the product or service had to be produced in your province or your community. Only 16% considered Canadian to be local, but 68% of people say that being Canadian owned is something they really think about as important when they're buying. So these two things seem a little bit at odds with each other, you might find, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the most important things to people is that employment locally. So that could be a chain store, that could be a large box store, and nothing wrong with those businesses. It's just it's a bit at odds with what people consider when they think about the concept of supporting local.
Yeah, and I think while we're talking about purchase considerations, there's also another element that I want to present here for people to consider, and that's environmental considerations. And one thing that we have asked a lot about is how Atlantic Canadians have changed shopping habits because of their environmental concerns. When we ask this, you'll see that it's really an important consideration for many. In fact, 6 in 10 say they've changed shopping habits because of environmental concerns. Most notably, they want to buy products with less packaging. 34% are making that conscious effort to purchase less plastic. Less packaging, less plastic, again, 25%.
Sorry.
And the whole concern for recycling and reusing, using more reusable items, using reusable bags. Almost 2 in 10 have said that. More conscious effort to buy eco-friendly products. So these are other really important considerations. Buying local is also there. From an environmental shopping consideration perspective, we see 13%. It's a very small minority, but it is still an important consideration. Said that it's an environmental consideration when they're actually making purchases. And you can see other considerations here are purchasing recyclable products, recycling or buying more recycled goods, and avoiding hazardous chemicals. these items, again, they are very much interlinked with the whole notion of shopping local. So really wanted to point that out because it is another consideration when consumers are making that final purchase decision. So let's go back to the actual purchases, Margaret.
Yeah, so this is really kind of the is your money where your mouth is question. And we asked people whether they purchased all of these types of products in January of 2021 or not. And then these percentages represent the number of people who said that they bought, if they bought that product, that they bought it locally. And the definition of buying locally means that it's either a store that is based locally, so they're buying in person in their own community, or the product is produced locally. So it's that kind of dual definition of local. And you can see that the majority of people say that they bought, if they bought alcohol in the month of January, that they bought that locally. And you know, that it's interesting because there's probably more than 64% of the people who bought alcohol were buying at local stores, but not necessarily buying. So you go into an NSLC and you buy an Italian wine, is that a local purchase or not? And so some people are clearly considering that not to be local, and other people are considering because, hey, that NSLC is based in my province, it employs local people from my community, and I'm putting my dollars into my province, that counts as a local purchase, even if the product isn't necessarily local.
And I think that alcohol example is a good one because it really speaks to the people and the employee factor, more so than necessarily where is that business owned. So
yeah, and food for delivery is kind of the same kind of case that of course, the food that you're buying, if it's fresh, is going to be from a local restaurant. If it's being delivered, I mean, probably not too many people ordering food from Ontario, unless it's, you know, a home food kit. But we, in this question, we're talking about meals being delivered. So most people would consider that to be a local purchase, but obviously there's still a third of people who are having food delivered who don't consider that to be a local purchase because maybe it's from a national chain or it's from a restaurant that's based outside of the province or community. So there's some nuances here in how people interpret the term local. Fresh food is another one. So most fresh food, of course, is going to be bought at a local store that employs local people, but only half of people who said that they're buying fresh food in the month of January said that it was purchased locally.
And a good example here too would be, I mean, you think of purchasing those strawberries from Chile or, you know, something like that. Are people considering that to be a local purchase because they're buying it at their local grocery store? You know, the intent is not, that is not a local product per se, but you can see there are so many important nuances and considerations here when you think about how people are buying and what they actually consider local to be.
Mm-hmm. And as we go down that list, you can see that fewer percentages of people who bought those types of products consider what they bought to be local in the month of January. Now, there's probably not all that many electronics that are produced locally, so that 18% of people who bought electronics in the month of January are probably considering the purchase to be local because it's from a local store. Probably the same with clothing, that few items of clothing are produced locally in the sense of your community or your province. Not out of the question, of course, there's locally produced goods, but the bulk of products within those categories are likely produced elsewhere. So there you can see kind of the pull of those concepts of is the store local because it's based here and the people that it employs are local versus the product actually being produced locally. So we wanted to understand kind of why local might not be a key consideration. And we asked about both services and products. We pulled those apart. And, you know, earlier we talked about how many people always look for the best deal when they're making a purchase. 77% of people told us that. And although household wealth, as Margaret outlined earlier, has gone up, net worth has gone up during the pandemic, there's still a sense of trepidation about spending, as we see from our consumer confidence index. So price is, of course, an important factor. And we asked people whether the quality and price of products and services, how it compared to from local to those produced elsewhere. And you can see that quality is way up. Only 1% of people said that products produced locally are of worse quality. So it's either the same or better, but the price might not be what people want. So half of people are telling us that the price of the product produced locally is worse compared to elsewhere. There's still almost half that say it's the same or better, but you can see that that's going to influence people's purchase decisions. And on the service side, it's a little less clear cut. So 33% said the quality of services from companies locally is better than elsewhere, and only 4% say worse. Most people say it's the same. So it's competitive. In some cases, it's better. And again, 2 in 10 say that the price is worse for services locally compared to elsewhere. And those people outnumber the people who say that the price is better. So you can see on average, people think it's the same or worse for that service.
A lot of important key takeaways here that we'd like you to consider, but we've got 4 key points. And one of them is, as a business owner and as someone that operates a business, it's really important, obviously, for each of you to highlight what matters most to consumers. We know employment is key. We know that people appreciate and put priority on having locals hired and having locals work in the community. So being able to actually support a business that is actually providing employment in the community. So businesses need to highlight that whenever that is relevant for them. Also, we know that where products are made or services are being developed, that's important. That we need to showcase where the products are and when they are local, when they are provincial, when they are Canadian. We need to highlight that and ensure that it's fully understood as a key consideration.
And as we said earlier, Canadian owned isn't necessarily considered to be local, but it is one of the key considerations that people think when they're deciding where to put their money. And being Canadian owned is something to highlight as well. If you're thinking about what matters to people when they're thinking about how to spend, that's something worth highlighting. And finally, price. So if your price is competitive, talk about it. Talk about how your service compares, because it's hugely important to people. Now, the idea of local remains a very strong feel-good message. None of the numbers that we told you had as much agreement as the fact that supporting local is important. It's highly, highly supported as a concept overall, but you can see there's huge differences in the way that people interpret the term local. So if you're a business that wants to highlight being local, it's not a bad message at all. I think it's just worth understanding how it could be interpreted in different ways, and that employment part is actually one of the most important local messages that you can endorse if you're talking to your customers, is telling people how many people you employ locally. So that idea of supporting local is really important to people. Again, if we go back to the benefits of supporting local, there's environmental, there's economic, and there's community-based CSR benefits and knock-on effects for other businesses. So it's really important as a concept, but it's, I think, worth peeling back the onion a little bit to understand some of the nuances.
Yeah. And I think also I'll just add that personal relevance to your customer base. So each business will have their own unique clientele, and really understanding how they might interpret local is another important consideration to make sure that you really can align your message, your service delivery to what's most important to your audience.
For sure. So that's the information that we had to share with you guys. And we've got some time to talk about this topic and kind of explore your questions about supporting local, and happy to provide some more background on our data as well.
Thank you both so much. That was awesome. I'm glad to hear that I did really support local, because I can attest that food and alcohol being my top locally sourced goods is definitely true, to share with friends, of course. So is there a reason for that? Is it mainly availability, would you say, for alcohol and food? Because I know we have a lot of options for those. There's a lots of local stores in all the neighborhoods. Would you say that's the biggest reason for that?
I think so. I mean, obviously, like the easiest way to get those products is to buy locally. So it's probably also the easiest place to support local, and really to think about the friends and neighbors that you have working for those businesses in your community, and you know, wanting to support them. I'm sure everybody knows someone who's involved in some aspect of hospitality. So I think you're right.
I'd also add that I think those two items are, to a certain extent, staples, although I won't say alcohol is a staple for everyone, but you know, I mean, during this time, with the pandemic, with lockdowns, with people socially, you know, being to some extent isolated, food has become very, very, very important for people, as has alcohol for some. So I think those kind of considerations, you know, the need, particularly for food, is always going to be so great, obviously, but.
Absolutely, yeah. When we first went into lockdown last year, I treated myself every Friday to an Obladi charcuterie box, and that just became the norm. So every week I was really expecting that, and yeah, I think I helped pay their rent, so that was great. We have a question that says, just out of curiosity, have you guys heard about Jiggity? I'd love to be able to share about this locally owned, in quotes, and operated service for locally owned and operated businesses to sell online in a marketplace.
I'm not familiar with it.
No, me neither.
Yeah.
No. Tell us more.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of you know, we know that convenience is another aspect of this story, and that's probably why we've seen such surges in online sales, is that people think about, you know, where's the easiest place for me to, and in some cases too, the safest place for me to procure this product. Is going to a store going to put me at risk of encountering people in the pandemic? So maybe I'm going to buy online instead to reduce my risk. But there's that convenience factor too. I want to support local, but maybe I don't know how to get that product during the pandemic, or it's more difficult to try and find parking and do that sort of thing. So if there's service like the one that this individual brought up that can help local businesses to market and get their products to consumers locally, it's that convenience factor is huge.
Absolutely, yeah. When you mentioned pre-pandemic that the touch and feel of a product was really important, like people being able to do that. I just did a case study for school on Amazon's online grocery store and how badly it failed their first attempt, because people wanted to go in and touch things and smell things and see how they felt. So I thought that was really interesting. We have a comment from question from Gordon Stewart. He says, if you look at a local product like wine and compare it with a comparable product from somewhere like Argentina, where does the price point kick in for their decisions? How much more would people pay for local?
Yeah, we've done some research into this. Not that we didn't showcase it this morning, but it really varies by demographic and the type of consumer that you're looking at. So some consumers are highly, highly price sensitive and are not looking for a premium product and are not looking for advice or kind of guidance. And so just buying the cheapest type of product might be their normal mode. Other people maybe are looking to have two different things contribute when they're making a purchase: A, supporting local, and then maybe trying something new or getting some advice and you know, trying out a new taste profile. And there might be a little bit of a premium that people are willing to pay. And we've seen that in some price conscious testing that we've done, optimal price for different products. So you can see sometimes it depends on what people are looking for, and there's always going to be people who are looking for the best deal, and it doesn't really matter, and they're not going to, they like the idea of supporting local, but they're not going to pay for it. Others are.
Yeah, I think the other point too is considering how open people are to consider new ideas and new options. We are creatures of habit, and our purchase habits also very much reflect that and in what we consume. So this presents a real challenge for businesses. You need to compel people to consider new options and give them a reason to, really look at different alternatives.
Mm-hmm. And back to that point about ease of purchase. So I know some breweries and wineries in our province have done a fantastic job of offering different services during the pandemic and like delivery. So, you see some of the breweries, vans driving around town and delivering their products. And I think people would be willing to pay a premium for some types of products like that if it's easy. So there's that convenience factor as well that goes along with, like, while I'm buying, if it's easy to do and I like the product and it might be a little bit more expensive, but I'm supporting friends and people in my community, then they're willing to pay that premium, but it only goes so far.
Yeah, that makes sense. We just have another comment about the Jiggity initiative. So it's an initiative by the Amherst and Area Chamber of Commerce to support local businesses. Started because many small local businesses couldn't connect with their customers last year. It's expanding to include Atlantic Canadian businesses, but a map shows customers where the businesses are located. So that sounds very interesting. Everyone go check it out. It's in the Q&A box there. Another question, how does this compare to research from, say, 10 years ago? Would you say there's been a shift towards supporting local?
So we don't have comparative data on these exact questions, but we've certainly seen a rise in that coming up unaided when we ask people about, where their priorities are. You saw that in the silver linings question, that would not have come up a year ago. It's something that people are really much more focused on their local community. And I think they see the impact of, if I spend my money at a local store. So to take your example, Emma, you're supporting Obladi. I'm sure not all of the charcuterie, or maybe it is locally produced, but the bulk of it probably is, and the store certainly is, or the restaurant certainly is, and the employment certainly is. So that supporting local is something that people are much more attuned to because of the pandemic. So I think it was already on the rise that you see lots of initiatives from business improvement districts and local associations trying to get people to spend their dollars on their local main street. And those are very important and really successful. But I think the pandemic has really just put a fine point on it.
And I think also that's been further accentuated with the whole focus on local pride, or Nova Scotia proud. Look at all that we have had to go through aside from the pandemic, Portapic, all of the things that have brought our communities together throughout the province. And there has been a real surge that's been evident in terms of, this sense of local pride. And I think again, that's just something that further endorses the whole notion of supporting local.
Yeah, very true. We're definitely seeing that sweeping across the province. It's good to see. Another question, if you were a restaurant and had some local and Canadian products on your menu, what are some selling points you should use when promoting or marketing?
Well, I think those are really worth pointing out. So someone's already in a local restaurant when they're looking at the menu. So in a sense, they're already supporting local. But I think on top of that, people are really looking to have local within local. And so I would absolutely highlight the fact that your product is Canadian, that it's local. If it's your community or your province, that's worth saying, absolutely. And as a local restaurant, I would talk about the number of people that you employ who are from the community. It's important to people to understand that they're spending money and it's staying in the community. And the other aspect that so aside from products, that I would highlight is the ways in which you're involved in your community. So the
Yep, that's a great idea.
causes that you're involved in, or the way that, you know, the knock-on effect of your employment.
And I think too, on the menu, another important consideration when you talk about the items that are featured is the ingredients. And if they are sourced local as well, I think that's just another really important point.
Yep, absolutely. Comment from the Atlantic Chamber. They say this is very, very interesting. Thank you. So this really signals a strong need where local seems so subjective for educating people and creating awareness about what local really is. It seems like just saying or promoting shop local isn't sufficient in terms of messaging and marketing. We need to take it one or many steps further and define it, tell people how business is local. Like you guys just mentioned, talking about your impact with employment, your impact with community donations. I had a prof in university who did a study on how often small businesses were approached for donations and how often they actually let people know about those donations. And it was not often. They would get asked almost weekly for like hundreds, even thousands of dollars of donations, and they always gave back because they're in the community, but they really didn't talk about it very much. So I'm glad to see the research supporting that.
Yeah.
And the other thing,
I just see Gordon's follow-up question there about whether there's a single definition of local, and to the Atlantic Chamber's point that it can be subjective. I think what is clear from the research is that if something is produced within your province or even your community, that absolutely counts as local. That's definitive. So if your product or service counts within that realm, you can proudly wear a local hat. If you're an independent business, absolutely, you are considered to be local by the majority of Atlantic Canadians. So those two things are for sure local. And then it gets a little bit more gray about what counts as local.
Yeah. Also, as a follow-up to the public education is so important here, so people can actually understand what local means and what local actually contributes. The importance, for instance, of our food sustainability, the ability to grow our own food in province and support our local farmers. And I think reminding people that supporting local and purchasing products that are produced here actually says so much more about our ability to have a sustainable food source here in the province as well. So I think we need to continually remind people of those important factors.
Absolutely. I want to touch on consumer confidence for a second. You mentioned that way at the beginning and how much it had dropped. And I'm wondering the difference between consumer confidence just in general versus in the actual businesses. Like, would you say that it's the actual businesses they're worried about going into because they fear that they might not be doing all the proper safety protocols, or is it more general feeling due to the pandemic?
Oh, I would say it's larger than that. It's larger than just going into a business. I think there's so much concern, fear, unknown in terms of what's going on, how long this will last, what will this mean from a job security perspective. There has been so much change. And just even as people have had to shift how they work, where they work, there are so many factors here. I think that the dramatic drop in consumer confidence really highlights the unknown and the concern that people have for this current time.
It's trepidation about spending more so than fear about going into a shop. It's kind of, I'm saving in case, I'm not going to take a risk and buy that major appliance right now, if you can find one, of course, but it's more kind of worry about spending rather than the actual act of doing so. Just to kind of underline that point too about local being a provincial thing, I see in the Q&A there RT's comment about having the choice to buy something from a national organization supporting Indigenous businesses, that she chose to buy from a Cape Breton business within the province. So not necessarily the community, but really it's the provincial aspect. So there is that kind of sense of local being provincial that's really important to consider.
Absolutely. We have a comment from Elena. It says, I worked as a math teacher last year and I used to talk to this about this to my students. I wish we could do some more work on rural communities to support local. And they say, thank you for sharing your research and educating us. Just a nice comment. And Gordon Stewart is asking if we will be sharing this presentation because it's very interesting and can be very helpful in marketing and promotion of local.
Yeah, no problem. We will we'll
Awesome.
send that on to the chamber for distribution afterwards. Yeah.
Perfect. They will appreciate that very much. It's a sunny day, so I think we lost a couple people to the sun. So back to consumer confidence just for a second. Is there anything that we can be doing to help rebuild that confidence as consumers, as employers, as business owners? What are some things that you've been hearing?
Margaret, do you want to take that? Or?
Sorry, I was reading Sherry's comment actually while you were saying that. So Margaret, I'll get you
to rebuild consumer confidence. Yeah, so I think it's back to some of those things that we touched on about the benefits of supporting local. So of course, there are uncertain times, probably more uncertain than we've ever lived in. But I think if people understand the benefit of the kind of knock-on effects of spending, that's really important. So understanding that there's other businesses that will be supported if you spend your dollar here, that means that we employ all of our employees, but then we also do banking with a local organization, or we also, buy services from another organization, and so on and so on. So every dollar we spend results in, I'm sure there's available economic data that shows the return. The numbers that I referred to, about 2 to 3 times more invested in communities, were North American wide stats, but I'm sure there's some that are for the province as well. And that's really important to underscore, is to say, by spending your money here, that helps to support the growth in our community. And I think people understand that the benefit of growth in our population and growth in our economy helps everyone. Yeah. So that's a message I think we all need to talk about.
Yeah, I will add, and apologies for reading that message while you were saying that question, but from a consumer confidence perspective, keep in mind that one of the components of consumer confidence relates to perceptions of the provincial economy as well, and how it's doing and how people anticipate it will be doing. So much, I think, in terms of a rebound here, will depend on how we navigate through this pandemic. How will we fare in terms of economically being able to open up our borders again and have things go back to some kind of normal? And I think all of that will need to happen, obviously, with the vaccine, rollout and everything else. So I expect it will be directly aligned to our province and our region starting to get back to some degree of normalcy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All about that ripple effect on the topic of getting back to normal. We have a question that asks, the pandemic has sent people shopping online. It's very hard to know what is local when you're buying online. Do you see a shift back to store buying in the future?
Yeah, I think there's going to be changes that are permanent for sure. People have found that buying staples, if you're buying something that you don't need to touch and feel because it's the same every time you buy that dishwashing liquid or shampoo or whatever, those kind of things are less important to have that in-store experience and the advice that you might get from in-store as well. So I think some of those things, if people have experienced the ease of shopping online and delivery of those sorts of things, it'll stay that way. We have asked people about what they expect to change and what they would like when the pandemic is over. And they've told us that if you're shopping for groceries online, many of them want to continue doing that. But one of the numbers that we shared with you was the importance of touching and feeling products. And I would add to that the importance of getting advice and like customer care when you're in a store or a restaurant. So some of those things I think will return to in-person because people are looking to try that shirt on and make sure that it fits, or to really, how many times have you ordered something online and the fabric doesn't feel the way you expected it to, or the quality of that product isn't what you expected to have. So that touch and feel of things, I think, is going to drive people to continue to go back to stores after the pandemic is over in its in full. So yeah, I think there will be a return, but it won't be for everything.
No, and that goes back to the comment made earlier too, that we are creatures of habit. If our habits change and they're working, it will be a little harder, a little more difficult to shift that. So the importance of local business really having that strong online component in place is underscored. I mean, it's purchase habits are changing. They have changed, and they will shift back to some extent, but we don't know where that's going to land.
Yep, absolutely. There's a lot of things that I've shifted to buying online, but I still love, I mean, I won't go back to this, but I love squeezing the tomatoes and touching all the avocados. So I really miss that, but
Yeah.
I guess I'll refrain from that for the near future. We have another question from the Atlantic Chamber. They asked, did you see a difference in any way between urban centers versus more rural communities in the shop local trends? That's a great question.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a couple points there that are interesting. So one is that the sense of community often in rural areas is so much greater. So there might be more of a focus to support the local businesses where you live, because you actually know the owner of that business and you want to support their business. So I think, like, I heard a story on the radio this morning about that goat farm that makes soap and other products up in Ingonish, and how they had a fire and how so many people in the community reached out to try and help that business to rebuild. And I think that's an example that would be replicated across the province in rural communities, that people really want to support their friends and neighbors who have businesses in hard times and good. But there's also the question of availability of product. So in urban centers, I think there's more opportunity for purchasing. There's more variety, and of course, you might be able to spend more of your wallet on local products, but just because of availability. Whereas rural, you might have 5 stores, you want to support them all, but there's different types of products that you can't support locally because it's not available. So that's one key difference, I think, is the availability of products, but then also that really close connection that you might have with the businesses locally.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, great points. You just touched on the goat farm. I just have such fond memories of the Groovy Goat Farm. So when they're ready to welcome people, just make sure you get there. I had a baby goat like jump up my leg, and he like actually crawled. It was the craziest thing. I didn't know goats could do that, but highly recommend a trip to the goat farm. They have great soaps. We just have another comment here that says, I'll definitely continue to shop locally as much as I can now that I'm more aware of the products and services available here. So that's good. Businesses are putting in that effort. Increasing concerns around service providers such as Amazon's practices also made me prioritize locally produced and available services. That's something I'm hearing quite a bit from our members here at the Chamber as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to parse those two things around service and products as well. I think sometimes we think of, the idealized shopping local is really supporting the high street, the main street stores. But there's also, think about all of the local businesses that offer professional services or other types of services that you can support. And that's equally a way to support local employment and local production of goods and services, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just about out of questions here, but if anyone else has any more, we'll take a couple more, but I have one for the Margarets. What are some of your favorite local businesses? Ooh. Since we're talking local.
And while we're talking about goats.
And goats, so I've got mine. It's Groovy Goat all the way.
I think one of the things that I've really been thinking about with the pandemic in terms of supporting local is really in food services, because I feel like more than other businesses, they've been hurt by the pandemic. So I've, like you, really trying when things were closed to order takeout, and a lot of businesses really just stepped up and did amazing things. Like the garden was offering these Sunday meals and ordered a lot of those. So really try to spread some spending around on local businesses in the food sense. But I love like strolling around the Hydrostone and looking at all the locally produced goods. And there's so many new businesses popping up there. So that's one of my favorite places to support local.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I really early on made a concerted effort to say at least once or twice a week, let's support a local food establishment. I mean, I've really discovered that takeout is not a bad deal. It's a wonderful experience. How the restaurants that have never offered that have responded has been wonderful, and the local market type stores, the vegetariums or the smaller food markets, they've become a real regular visit spot for me.
Yeah, Quinpole Road and Spring Garden as well, and downtown Halifax. I mean, there's all sorts of places where you can find really unique things. And at Christmas time particularly, our company decided that we wanted to support local. So when we bought gifts for our staff, we did it all locally, and we bought cards that were done by a local artist. We bought masks that were produced in New Brunswick actually, but we have operations there, so we felt that was local. We bought Peace by Chocolate. Like, we were really trying to support some of the local businesses in our spending, and we do that when we do surveys too. We try to offer prizes that are local. So as a plug for the Chamber's panel, the Chamber has a research we think is very important to understand how people feel on important issues. And I know the Chamber's got a important survey out right now on sick pay and trying to figure out what the policy should be around and response to the federal government's proposal to provide sick pay. And so when we're offering prizes, like in that survey, we do vouchers for local organizations to try and support local in that way as well. So sign up for the Chamber's panel. You won't get a ton of invites, but just when they're really important issues. And same with the East Coast Voice panel. It's a way to have your say and win a local prize.
And I just want to also add one other point, being that buying local really requires almost a focused or change of mindset for many people and how they are considering purchase decisions. Margaret's example is a great one. When we considered our Christmas gifts, how can we supply or how can we support local? But another way is if you think about how we consume food, historically, if you go back many, many generations, food was very seasonal because that's what was available at certain times of year. We now expect everything to be available all the time. It's not a bad deal to say, I'm really going to focus on strawberries more in the summer, or blueberries when they're in season, or rhubarb, but actually think about appreciating and embracing and exploring, when things are actually available at certain times to support local. So it's a change of mindset to a certain extent, where we have to say, hey, is there a way I can be focusing on something that is provided locally at this point? So.
Yep, that's a really great point. I love the changing your mindset, because I used to be a much more passive shopper when it came to grocery shopping. And to be fair, back then I was living with my mom, so whatever she got, I was good with that. And now for the last 10 years living on my own, I'm a little more aware that maybe I can't have strawberries in December, and maybe that's okay. My local market doesn't have that. So I am trying to be more conscious of that. So thank you for saying that. Thank you both so much. We're just about out of time here. We have lots of thank yous and great presentations. So really well done, really engaged audience. We appreciate everyone coming out today. We will send you all a follow-up email with the member insights panel that Margaret mentioned, as well as their presentation with all these great stats and information. Don't forget to tell people that you employ people here in Nova Scotia. We love to hear it. What else do we have? I mentioned the member insights panel. Oh, since it's a sunny day, I'm going to mention that we launched our registration for our golf challenge happening on June 10th. It's happening at the Chester Golf Club. There's a discount for small businesses and non-for-profit, so go check that out at halifaxchamber.com/events. This webinar was recorded and will be available to all of you shortly on YouTube. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the sunshine. Maybe get out there for a quick walk if you can. Margaret and Margaret, thank you both so much. That was fabulous, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.